if Adam's doing his job with this business owner client sitting across from me or on the phone on a Zoom call, if I'm doing my job, then I'm helping them understand what they don't even know, which is you can't do that as a business owner. You can't just quit and that's it. It's all over. For instance.
Hey there, Jeff Barnes here, and welcome back to another episode of Angels, Exits, and Acquisitions. And we're talking today with Adam Koos, who is a wealth planner as well as a business advisor helping people exit their business for maximum value. And he talks about some really incredible stats that I think every business owner needs to be aware of, as well as what you can do to start preparing for life after your business. I think that's really important. A lot of business owners don't think about that. And as a result, by the time they retire, Adam talks about a statistic where most business owners will say, I wish I'd never retired, right? I don't want you to be one of those people. So make sure you listen to this episode and give us a thumbs up, like it, subscribe, and share, and let us know your thoughts. Take care.
Welcome to Angels, Exits, and Acquisitions, the place to learn how to fund, scale, exit, and massively profit as an angel investor or entrepreneur. Brought to you by the Angel Investors Network. And now, here's your host, Jeff Barnes.
All right, welcome back to another episode of Angels, Exits, and Acquisitions. I'm your host, Jeff Barnes, and today I'm joined with Adam Koos. Adam, how are you doing?
I'm doing awesome. Thanks so much for having me on.
Absolutely. Looking forward to talking with you about wealth management and especially business exits and things like that and stuff you guys are doing at Libertas Wealth Management with your guys' clients. But before we get into all of that, why don't you go ahead and give folks a quick background about who you are, where you come from, and how you got to where you are today?
Sure. I won't give you the long story because it's pretty long and I don't know, for many probably pretty boring, but I wasn't really supposed to get into this business. So I went to school at Ohio State for pre-med, actually. I was going to be a trauma surgeon, but I always joke now we're just financial surgeons here instead. But no, I started in my career at 21 years of age, 10 days before the World Trade Center went down. I was, like I said, 21. I was about 60 pounds lighter, so I looked like I was 16. And, going door to door, business to business, trying to convince people 3 times my age to trust me with their life savings was not an easy task when you consider the fact that the market's precipitously falling for about 18 months there. But, made it through and worked my butt off and always kind of knew that I wanted to hang my own shingle. So at 25 years of age, on November 4th of 2004, decided to start this firm. So Libertas Wealth Management Group is what we've been doing, I guess you could say, my career now for 23 and a half years, believe it or not. Kind of have to pinch myself from time to time. And throughout that process, a lot's changed. The market's changed, and we've realized a lot of great opportunities out there to help certain types of people. And when I say that, what I mean is specifically business owners. I read a book during COVID when things got really quiet. We usually have, maybe 25 appointments a week is kind of our typical cadence at our office. But, being an essential business, we got to go to the office. But in 8 weeks, when COVID shut everything down, we had 3 people come in over the entire 8-week period. So it got pretty slow. And we were kind of installed a couple new initiatives, but, eventually we just kind of ran out of things to do. So I started doing more reading. And I remember reading this book called Walking to Destiny by Chris Snyder, and the statistics in the book just kind of blew my mind. When I say they blew my mind, it's not like your stereotypical cliche, it blew my mind, but it was more like the stats. They upset me. They kind of made me angry. They were shocking. And the statistics here are this: 80% of business owners' net worth is tied up in their business. You're shaking your head. See, that's exactly what I did when I read that.
Yep.
The second stat is that 80% of businesses don't sell. They dissolve.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the first one that kind of pissed me off. The third stat is 75% roughly of the 20% that do sell for less than market value, which is disheartening to say the least. And then when you consider all those statistics and all the the stats we know about how many businesses fail within the first year versus second year, it got a little bit depressing, I guess. So when COVID hit and we were kind of ran out of things to do, and I read that book, I decided I was going to spend the second half of my career focusing on bringing awareness to business owners about the dire need to start planning for exit, which is all part of planning for growth, by the way, but just doing it in the right way. but planning for exit well before they're ready. And really, in a perfect world, a client of ours who's within 3 years of selling is in a perfect position to see the absolute value of their company and the relative value, so their multiple increase dramatically if they just do the things that they need to do to plan to sell that company at some point, in the next 3 years or more for that matter. But that all being said, it doesn't matter if it's 3 years or 13 years. Every owner can benefit tremendously by going through the kind of planning we're talking about. So that's kind of, I don't know, maybe the Cliff's Notes version, I guess, of kind of where I was, where I've been, and kind of where I'm at now. But so we focus primarily on helping owners and as well as executives, basically make work optional and stay that way.
I like that. Making work optional. That's awesome. Yeah, going back to the beginning of your career, it's kind of funny picturing yourself, like you said, at the end of the dot-com bust, essentially. I remember NASDAQ dropping 40, 50% over the course of 18 months. And I lost a lot of my money that I'd inherited. Like, it wasn't a lot. It was 30 grand that I inherited from my great grandmother who set that aside for me to go to college. But then I ended up in the Navy. So the Navy was going to pay for college. So I got the fund and I, turned it over to this, wealth manager, financial planner. And I know that there's a big difference there. Turned it over to this financial planner, said, oh, well, tech stocks are booming. You got to get in that. And sure enough, I did that 18 months later. Well, there goes whatever money I had. So that was fun.
Well, thank you for your service, by the way. Appreciate you.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah. So, we were talking about, being the skinny kid straight in college at that time, right? And trying to tell people, hey, I can help you with your money. It's like, yeah, that is cutting your teeth, the hard way, right? Like going right out there on the grindstone and putting your nose to it and getting into it. I know that probably built a lot of fortitude for you over the years with your business, because that door-to-door, belly-to-belly, nose-to-nose selling is got to be, in my opinion, one of the best lessons and trainings that anyone can get when it comes to growing the business, right?
I totally agree. I think if you aren't resilient, you learn to be. But
right,
yeah,
or you learn that it's just not for you, right?
Yeah, touche.
It's kind of funny. I remember doing that. I was getting into real estate in around 2006, 2007 in California, and going door to door and trying to convince these people who were underwater on their mortgages to sell me their house for no money, right? Just, give me your house, I'll take care of the rest of it. And you talk about, really learning lessons the hard way. You're trying to tell, and people think you're taking advantage of them, and they don't realize that you're actually there to try and help them. You have solutions. They never heard of it. So I can only imagine what you're going through, especially at the time when the market's going down. It's like, man, if I could just figure this out, I'll be better off. And here you are 20 plus years later, and everything seems to be working out, right? So well done.
I always say I haven't worked in 23 years.
Nice. That's awesome. And like you said, when you're doing what you love, right?
Makes it easier.
So, we were talking a little bit before we start here. I don't consult businesses anymore and I actually wrote a book, All Hands on Deck, which is about using structure, systems, and optimization tools that we use in the Navy to help business owners. And I used to do that for a lot, because when I was in the insurance business, I literally went into over 10,000 businesses, and I got to see how they operated over the course of a dozen years. And I was appalled with how terribly businesses are run. I'm like, how in the world are you even making money? I still wonder that to this day.
Yeah.
How in the world a lot of people are actually making money in spite of how poorly they're actually run. And one of the things that I learned along the way, I did business evaluations. I tried to help people. And one of the things that always drove me nuts was that they would keep paying me month after month after month as a consultant, but they would never implement the things I suggested. I said, all right, this is one of those situations where I because of my personality, I need this to work. I need you guys to do the thing. Otherwise, I can't keep you as a client. So I'd imagine, I'm hoping, anyway, I don't know for sure, but I'm hoping it's a little bit different with you, because you're talking about their long-term wealth as well. Mm-hmm. It's not just, hey, it's a good idea for you to do this and you're paying me as a consultant. It's like, no, I really want you to do this because I'm here to help you with your long-term wealth, or your legacy planning, your estate planning, and so on. Is that so? Let us sneak behind the curtain a little bit there. What are those conversations like? And do you see business owners finally waking up at some point to be like, oh, you're right, I should fix this?
I feel like the conversations that surround their retirement planning, getting them retired, getting them to exit, those conversations are, I don't want to say easy, but they're very simple. People generally listen to most everything we say. They typically do everything we ask them to do. But I will say, I was sitting here going like this when you were saying that, it's like, when it comes to the business advisory side of the fence, I think that, I'm just speculating here, I think that sometimes it's because, it's their baby, right? They built this.
Mhm.
I didn't build it. Now I built my own business, right? But I didn't build their business. So I think that maybe some of it's because they've built it. They've been through their own journey and they've got their own scars. I think it's really hard to listen to someone else provide advice and implement that advice when it's not your idea, or maybe it's coming from the outside and they don't know what you've been through, that kind of thing. I also think that the other side of that coin is probably just a matter of time. I mean, I think one of the biggest problems business owners have is they just lack of ability to delegate.
Yeah.
I often get the question from, other financial advisors and people in my industry, business owners, like, how in the world do you have the time to do what you do? And it's like, well, because I'm a really good delegator. I believe in the whole Dan Sullivan philosophy of who, not how. That if I have my unique abilities and that's what I need to be doing. Whatever I do best, that I'm naturally gifted at, is where I need to be spending my time.
Yep.
As well as, of course, with the things that I'm licensed to do, of course. But other than that, I mean, if I want to figure out how to do a better job of marketing, and I want to get into taking long form content like this podcast and turning it into short form content, I need to be hiring a who to do that, not figuring out how to do it, right? So I think that a lot of owners, they lack time. And so even if they love your idea, it's really hard to implement some of these ideas and see the needle move, just because, I think many owners are so busy working on their business and selling their widget or their service or whatever it happens to be. And it becomes difficult to take the time to, step aside, get outside the box and work on that engine and make improvements to it because you're so busy in it.
Yeah. I think you said a couple of things that are really important I want to hit on. We say similar thing, the who, not how, but say if it's not your genius, it's not your job, right?
There we go.
If you are doing something, or more importantly, what I end up seeing is people that don't know how to do something, but are not sure how to even hire that, who to go to, where to go, or they don't have the money. They don't think they have the money to hire that out. They start learning something new. And I don't know if you're familiar with Simon Sinek, but he has this thing called, YOS, Y operating system. And so I went through this whole assessment. And what I learned about myself, and I would encourage anyone who's listening to this, I don't get paid for this, but anybody who's interested about their personal development, they got to take this thing, right? Because I've taken every personality assessment on the sun, right? The DISC, the Myers-Briggs, all the other stuff, right? This was the one that was the most impactful for me because it told me, it opened my eyes to one of the things that I've known has been my Achilles heel throughout history, is that I will try to become the expert at the thing that I don't understand. Mm-hmm. And that has been the thing that's held me back. And I find that a lot of business owners have a very similar mentality. Mm-hmm. They want to become an expert. They want to be seen as the expert because they feel like if they're the founder or the CEO, everybody's looking at them. And as a result, they want to have all the answers. And then I go back to the story that Napoleon Hill told about Henry Ford. And if anyone's watched the movie The Strangest Secret, or not The Strangest Secret, The Secret actually is just what it is. They actually made a movie of the book. And they put this whole thing together where they reenacted Henry Ford being on the stand because somebody was accusing him of being a dullard and, incompetent, all this sort of stuff. And he ends up suing the newspaper, right? And there's this scene that struck me really great, which I think you just alluded to as well, which is this guy's asking him all these questions to try and figure out if he's actually a smart guy. He says, listen, young guy, I may not know the answers to all the questions you have, but I have all these buttons on my desk. And if at any given time, one of these questions come up that I don't know the answer to, I know exactly which button to push to get the answer. So why would I bother wasting my time knowing all that stuff?
Yep.
Right. And that hit me like a ton of bricks because I'm like, gosh, I'm always the guy that's trying to know all the stuff rather than figure out who knows the stuff. And I think that just making that one change in business is going to drastically change the outcome and go back to the statistics you're talking about, whether you're going to be able to sell the business for above market value or below, because people don't want to buy a job, right?
No, I think that the reasoning is probably different for everybody. I think some business owners or many business owners are probably just very inquisitive people by nature. For me, I like to learn. It's fun. It's interesting. I like to learn about different things. I think that, like you said, I don't think you're totally right. I think many owners also maybe like to have all the answers, or they don't want to be perceived as not having all the answers. That might be part of it. Some of them might not have the money to hire somebody, or they don't think, and that's another subject altogether, by the way.
Right.
When we start talking about fractional CFOs and, having forecasts in your your quiver, as opposed to just working in your business like you work for it and that's it. Actually running it like a business owner, like a big boy business. But yeah, no, I totally agree.
Yeah, and I think that when you get into talking about their money, and I'm just going to ask you this: at what point does the light bulb finally go on for them, where they say, "Hey, all right, I'll start taking what you're telling me seriously"?
Usually so the first time we talk to somebody is always an intro call. It's about a 20 to 30-minute intro call where we get to know them, kind of get an inventory, understand what they're, everything from, if they're married or not, if they own a home, and if they have kids and how old the kids are, to if they have a mortgage or not, how many assets they have in terms of IRAs, non-IRAs, qualified, non-qualified, life insurance. I mean, everything about them kind of in a snapshot. But then we kind of go over how we work with our clients, what that process looks like, and then we open it up for questions. So I wouldn't say it's on that call. That's more of like a just kind of get to know each other call. But on the discovery meeting, which is a very, very exhaustive 2.5 hour meeting of us just peppering them with questions. And if it's a business owner, typically, well, I shouldn't say typically, that 2.5 hour meeting can sometimes turn into 2 meetings that exceeds 3.5, 4 hours sometimes, just depending, because obviously business owners have a whole lot more to talk about than your average retail client who works for Cardinal Health and Worthington Industries or what have you. So I would say at the end of that discovery meeting that the light bulb goes off, they get really serious and they're ready to just hit the ground running. And that's before an hour-long education meeting. That's before an 1.5 hour long financial planning meeting. That's before we get into business advisory and exit planning and business transition planning advice. I would say it's that second big meeting.
Before continuing, please subscribe and share this video to help us reach more people and stay notified of our latest releases. Now, let's continue watching and learning.
And during that call, are you guys talking about, I'm assuming, their future, right? What does life look like after work, after business, and so on? And do they finally realize, or do you let them know, by the way, here are the stats, right? The scary stats you shared earlier. Do you let them know that, hey, there's a chance, 80% chance you may not even be able to sell your business? Does that scare people?
I think we're not trying to scare anyone, of course, but I think sometimes in the right situation you need to, in order to get people motivated. But generally speaking, I think that there's a couple different types of people. For the people who are very numbers based, I think you need to remind them that because 80% of your net worth is your business, part of your plan, your retirement plan, has to be how much does that business need to be worth so that you can quit and make work optional, right? So that's part of it. But then for the other people, the other personality type that, and it could be in the same person, but for the other personality type that maybe gets it and they're like, okay, yeah, I understand the numbers. I trust you. You'll make the numbers work. A lot of those people, what they run into is this idea of what I like to call life after football, where they get done and they don't really have a serious plan for the non-numbers stuff. It's like, what are you going to do? I mean, you and I, Jeff, we spend so much time working on whatever it is we're working on. Like I always say I have 3.5 companies because one of them is a partnership, but I'm running 3.5 companies. And if I were to just sell all of them one day and had nothing to do, I don't even know how scary that is, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if I'm talking to the right person, like if Adam's doing his job with this business owner client sitting across from me or on the phone on a Zoom call, if I'm doing my job, then I'm helping them understand what they don't even know, which is you can't do that as a business owner. You can't just quit and that's it. It's all over. For instance, we had a client once that said their goal, when we got to goals and big picture soft stuff, having nothing to do with numbers, what are you going to do, when this business is sold? Well, my wife and I have always wanted to have this house, in Colorado. So we've been working on getting the house built. And I'm like, okay, when's it going to be built? And we're like, well, it'll be done next summer. So, we're going to move out there, probably spend a lot of time out there, keep our place here in Columbus. I'm like, okay. So and what are you going to do? And he goes, well, just hang out, spend time at the house. And I'm like, okay. So, but what are you going to do at the house? And he starts getting frustrated with me. He goes, well, I don't know. We're just going to hang out. Like, it's Colorado. It's nice. I'm like, yeah, but with the 60 hours you've been spending running this company, understanding you might go to bed a little earlier and wake up a little bit later every day. What are you going to do with all that time in between? I told him, I'm like, most business owners a year after they sell strongly regret that they sold. And the number one reason why they regret selling is because they didn't have a plan for what they were going to spend their time on after they sold. So we've got to figure that out. We can't just sell and say we're going to hang out in Colorado. I mean, that's not enough. We have to have, make your personal life your business, right? Become a personal CFO at that point. But what are you going to do? Where are you going to go? Who are you going to spend your time with? What hobbies are you going to pick up? And if there's not enough of that, maybe you need to start something else. Maybe you need a passion project, but there's got to be something after football.
100%. Yeah. And I think about that regularly. I used to think, oh, no big deal. Build the business, have fun, and then, eventually go travel. Well, geez, I mean, if you're in your 70s or 80s, when you find, which is what's happening with a lot of folks, right? They're waiting much longer to retire because of that exact issue. They're saying, well, but we're not working in the industrial era anymore where these people are working really hard manual labor jobs and their bodies can't take it anymore. We're sitting behind desks, we're on calls. A lot of the time people are working from their homes. They're not even having to leave the house. They're not having to travel as much. So they stick around a lot longer, right? And because they're sticking around longer, they're making good money. Everything's taken care of. This is the way to spend their time. But you say, oh, exactly that. Okay, well, what are you going to do? Well, I'm going to travel the world. Oh, okay, cool. When you're 75, 80 years old, you're going to start traveling? Like that doesn't, I don't know about you, but I'd much rather do it while I'm in my 30s, my 40s, right? 50s even. But, you start getting up there in the years. And I even had a conversation with a gentleman yesterday. And I've known this guy for 20 years of my life. I said, yeah, I'm finally going to retire. Cool. What are you going to do? Well, I have maybe 10 good years left in me before I can't do anything that I really would want to do because my body will wear out. Like 10 years, right? And here he is. He's been working for 50. So I think about that. And I think that a lot of people have that same situation or same challenge of, the hypothetical client you're talking about there, which is all I really am thinking about right now is how do I get out from under the stress of running the day-to-day business, right? I think that's as far as they get. They don't go much further than that.
Yeah. What I think is really interesting about that, what you just said is, I'll give you an analogy. If anybody's listening or watching this who's ever put off a home project, and they put it off, and they put it off, and they put it off, and then one day they go, you know what? Let's move. Whether it's because you're retired or you're just moving, let's move. But the realtor says, well, we've got to declutter, but you got to get these, floors refinished, so you sand them down, refinish them. Got to replace that carpet. It's awful. Replace the carpet. So you replace the carpet, you refinish the floors. You get done, you're like, God, I kind of like it here.
Right. I don't want to move now.
That's what happens to business owners when they start implementing business transition and exit planning well in advance of selling, is all of a sudden you have more time back. You're making more money. You're more profitable. Your team is more cohesive. Your team is happier. You're spending more time with your family. You're doing more things that you love. And you're growing at a faster clip, which means your company is going to be worth more when you're ready to sell, just by nature of the fact that you've done this planning now. So it's kind of like changing the carpet. I mean, it's not that simple, obviously, but the analogy fits, I think.
I love that analogy. I think that's absolutely perfect, right? Because, again, why do business owners want to sell their business? It's because they're tired of running the business.
Yeah.
But my premise has always been, if you are running a business, the business should run without you, right? We mentioned Robert Kiyosaki before we started recording here, but he said in one of his books, a business is something that you can leave and be gone for 3 months and have nothing to do with it, and it's running better when you get back than it was before you left, right? And that idea of building a business like a series of systems, what I always think of, it's a series of systems. So you build the systems, and then people run the systems. You have to have managers to manage the people who run the systems, right?
Yeah.
But when you are the system, you don't really have a business, right? So when it comes to your clients and you're sitting there and you're talking with them about this, what are some of those ideas that you start trying to seed with them early on to help them understand this? Because again, going back to it, it's like having that conversation of, oh, by the way, and that's why I stopped trying to help people fix their business. 80% of businesses won't even sell. Like that blows my mind.
Yeah, it's
They're just going to close up shop after 10, 20, 30 years. They're just going to shut down because they couldn't figure out a way to sell it. we actually started just buying businesses because when you find the good ones that maybe are not run properly, we can just buy them with investors and then we can tune them up and turn them around if we want to.
Yeah.
And that's a lot easier than me giving my time and advising people than and having them not implement it. I'd rather us have control over that.
I get it.
So what do you start? How do you start that conversation with clients to say, hey, let's get you to the point where you're not in that 80% that just close up shop?
The good news is there's no shortage of problems, right? So
Right.
there's plenty to say. In fact, there's always too much. So I always start with the end in mind, explaining to them that if we were to go through a planning process, that within the first few months, if not the first 2 months, we're going to find very quickly that there's probably somewhere in the ballpark of 12 to 15, pillars of change that we can make, but we're not going to have time to even touch half of those. So, what we're going to do is we want to focus on the ones that are going to move the needle. So, we want to start with things like cleaning up your financials, making sure we've got the right professionals in place, whether that's, CPA, maybe installing a fractional CFO. We want to look at de-risking. So things like, what percentage of your revenue is your top client? What percentage of your revenue are your top 5 clients? What percentage of your revenue is run by the owner? In other words, the relationships with the owner, and that's it. We want to look at relationships on the team. Like, do we have the right people on the bus? Is everybody swimming in the same direction? I always like to say I don't personally believe the best businesses have a shark running the show with a bunch of fish following the shark. I think it's the best businesses are a bunch of piranhas that are all swimming in the right direction together. So I think, again, getting the right people on the bus and making sure continuity is in place. No buyer has any interest in a company where if the owner kicks the bucket in the process of due diligence that, the business is done, right? So continuity plans, having those in place. So, I mentioned owner dependency is a big part of it. And again, that's part of the, the advice that we get to where it's actually going to make the owner happy. The owner's going to be happier at the end of the day. The staff's going to be happier. There's probably delegation problems in there somewhere where the staff would love if the owner would just get their hands out of the bucket, like, let me do my job,
Right.
There might be a need to replace some of the team members. So I always like to say that if you wonder if you should have somebody on your team, anybody, multiple team members, doesn't make a difference. When you look at your team, pretend that you had the ability to completely start over and hire from scratch. And through that lens, if you would hire that person right now, you should keep them. And if you wouldn't, then maybe it's time to start thinking about the hard conversation. So that would be part of it. I don't know. I'm probably going off the rails here, but I would say those are probably the big first things.
So one of the things that I learned a long time ago and just it stuck with me, and I think you just alluded to it, is A players hire A players, but B players hire C and D players because they're more worried about this person coming in and stealing their job.
That's a good point.
And
yeah.
I think that when you're a business owner, your only job, in my opinion, your only job should be to hire A players, right? And if you get really, really good at hiring the right people, it's going to be so much easier for your business to run itself. And so I think that's such an important piece of getting this whole thing right. And one of the questions that I have for you, and I know that the best time to start planning to sell your company, because I've helped start dozens and dozens of companies, the best time to plan your exit is before you even start.
Yep.
Right. But when's the next best time?
Yesterday.
Right.
No, I think that, the best time to start is now, honestly, because this is probably what I'm most passionate about, is that it's almost like the nature of the process being called exit planning is where it's where all owners get it wrong. Because owners, I'm not selling yet, so I don't need to do this. So if it's exit planning, then why do I need to plan for exit when I'm not selling? I'm not selling for 3 years, so I'll worry about it when I get there. But you need to start planning at least 3 years ahead of time, right? If it's 2 years, I'm not sure how much I can help. We've turned down clients this last couple of years, and we've referred them to M&A brokers and business bankers and investment bankers, and corporate attorneys that could do a better job of helping them than we could. But if you want to sell in 14 months and you don't want to make any of the changes that I'm recommending and maybe kick that can down the road a little bit, then I can't help you. So you've got to be willing to give it the time that it requires to really see that absolute return go up and to see the multiple go up. But I think that, I think that the best time to start planning is as early as humanly possible, understanding that, if you're in the first 2, 3, 4 years of your business, you probably shouldn't be messing around with it, honestly. Um, with rare exceptions of your tech startups and things like that. That would be the exception. There are companies that turn around in 5 years. So yeah, I mean, if you're a business owner that's 45 years of age and you don't want to sell until you're 60, my recommendation to you would be to get exit planning out of your vocabulary and call it business transition planning. And you want to start implementing a business transition plan right now to transition your company from wherever it is today to wherever you want to go. And I guarantee you could give me a list of things that you want from your business that you're not getting right now because you're probably too busy, it costs too much money, and you don't have time.
Yeah. No, exactly right. It's one of those situations that people don't want to think about it because they're just so in the weeds right now. And they're like, hey, listen, I just got too many fires to put out currently.
Yep.
And the irony is, well, if you'd started thinking about this a long time ago, you wouldn't have those fires because you would be planning for somebody else to take on this responsibility. Like you said, becoming a master delegator, I think is so important. And yeah, okay, it can cost money and it takes time, and not everybody's a good manager and not everybody's a great leader. But at the end of the day, if you aren't thinking in these terms of how do I actually implement a system of hiring people, training people, getting them to do the jobs without me having to do all the work, you're always going to be doing the work, right? And you're always going to have bad people.
Well, if you don't do this planning, you're going to wish you did. You're going to be, hugely regret doing it. If you do it eventually, you're going to wish you would have done it sooner.
Yeah.
And then the last thing you need to know is that it's always going to be hard. It's not going to be easy at any point. It's going to take time. It's going to, you're going to lose time from your business. You're going to get less time with your family because you have to take that step back and give up some of that time in order to get where you want to be. And the longer you wait, the harder it is. But it's gonna be painful initially, but not painful in a bad way. It's gonna be the equivalent of what we all call growing pains, right? But it's gonna. I guess that's the bottom line. It's gonna be work. But when you're done with it, you're gonna be so glad that you did the work and you did the planning. You'll be telling all your friends that are business owners, you've got to do this, you've got to do this. And it doesn't pay you anything to do it, but you'll be, at the top of a mountain calling out to all your friends, like, you've got to do this.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's so important for people to understand. All right, Adam, we are getting towards the end here, but I have one question that I want to ask you that we asked all our guests, which is, now that you've gotten to where you are in your career, you've taken your lumps, you've obviously been successful, you've had your ups and your downs. If you can go back to that skinny college kid, at Ohio State, and give him one piece of advice, what would that piece of advice be?
Wow. Wow, that is such a good question. You're going to have to tell your producer to cut some dead air out here while I think about that. Oh, wow.
That's an important question, right? Because it's hard to just think of one.
Well, it's not only hard to think of one, but I've always been that person who my whole career, I still do it now. I use a martial arts analogy. I always say the black belts can always learn something from the white belts, getting back to basics. So I've always been that person that I'll go to a conference and I'll see somebody speak on stage, and then I go up to them and I meet them, I get their card, and then I incessantly bother them until they become my mentor, whether they like it or not. So I have so many mentors that I've accumulated over the years. Was just on the phone with one this morning. So I think that I've done a lot of things good, but if I had one piece of advice for myself, I would say be less rigid. I think I get an idea in my head, and it's a benefit to want to just go after it and push the throttle forward and just go. And I think that sometimes there have been a couple times in my career where I would have saved myself a ton of pain if I would have been a little bit less rigid and said, okay, well, it doesn't have to be this or that. It can be something in between. Test it out, see how it goes. I've always been somebody. Literally, my wife bought me some cufflinks years ago. One says off, one says on. Like, I'm such an extremist, and I think that a lot of business owners are extremists, and they're either 100%, 110% on, and they have a hard time relaxing. And then when I relax and I get on vacation, if it's long enough, I have a hard time re-engaging because I'm in relaxing mode. So that's not the point. I think the point would be just I wrote an article about it actually in Proactive Advisor magazine, where I talk all about portfolio management, investment management, and how I was so rigid about using technical analysis and trend following, and that was the best way to go. And to this day, I still believe that's the best way to go. But there's, I could give you 5 reasons why it makes sense to be a little bit less rigid and to be, to combine strategies. Like I said, for a number of reasons. So that's that. I've never been asked that before, and I appreciate you asking it, because honestly, that was a great question. I've never been asked that before, but that was a tough one to answer. But that would be it. I wish I would have been less rigid, and I've learned some lessons the hard way as a result.
Awesome. Well, that's always good to hear. I mean, I know a lot of people, when we're listening to this, we don't think about that. What's the one piece of advice? And here's the irony of this, right? Would you have listened to yourself back then?
Nope.
Right.
I probably wouldn't have, man. I probably wouldn't have.
That's the sad truth. We all have to learn the hard way, but I think that's the beauty of life in general, is that it's not about the destination, it's about the journey, and you learn some incredible things along the way. And even if you'd love to be able to go back in time and give yourself that advice, likelihood is you probably still wouldn't listen, still make the same mistakes, right?
Yeah, man.
But it's good for people to hear, for sure. So, all right, you've been listening to the Angels, Exits, and Acquisitions podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Barnes. You've been with Adam Koos today. If you liked everything, go ahead and check out the show notes, which, by the way, Adam, I didn't ask you, how do people find you? We'll make sure we get all this stuff in the show notes.
On the retail investment side, so if you're looking for, retirement planning, financial planning, tax planning, estate planning, investment management, libertaswealth.com. It's LIBERTAS, libertaswealth.com. If you want to talk more about the exit planning, business transition planning, see, I got to get that out of my vocabulary, right? Exit planning. Head over to elevateandexit.com. There's a ton of free education there. There's assessments you can take for free about your business. We're trying to give away as much free advice as humanly possible, just because, again, we just want to educate people and spread the word about the need for this.
Beautiful. All right. So we'll make sure we include all of that information in the show notes. So if you're watching this or listening to this, make sure you check out those show notes so you guys can connect with Adam and learn more about what Libertas Wealth Management does, as well as Elevate and Exit, right? I got that in the right order?
You got it.
So if you are a business owner, be sure to check out all of Adam's materials. And Adam, thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Take care.